All right, today we're looking at a game called Ascended, and I guess it has a subtitle, Become Chosen. This is a 2016 game, and it is, I'm going to show you the back of the box here. I'm looking at a copy that was sent to me by the designer. As always, I make no promises to anyone that sends me a game about what I'm going to say, or even whether I'm going to do the video. And we have players 2 to 4. There is a solitaire rule set built into the game. This is the second edition of the game, and that I think is included in the second edition. I'll talk about that in a bit. I'm showing you a setup here for actually the 2-player game, and I'll talk about why a bit later. Age 13 plus, time 60 to 90 minutes. Read you a little description. Ascended is a game about survival and magic based on amazing new mechanics. You play the role of a creature that awakens in the middle of an icy landscape with no notion of what or where it is, constantly feeling the presence of others like you, destined to fight for ascension, etc. As days and nights go by, you get to hunt, raid ancient sites for precious magical items, confront powerful villains, recruit brave companions, and adopt amazing and godlike mutations. Take your prize, become chosen. It comes with a number of different components. You're seeing some of them here. There's a tile laying system that happens as the game progresses. There's basically a couple of different parts of the game, day and night, and then I think day again. We're standing here on the day tiles, and we're about to get to the night portion of the game where we need to flip over all these tiles and indeed connect the two parts of the board. So in this 2-player version, represented by these little folks here now, these do not come with the game. What they have you play with, and what the rules actually refer to as models, I found to be just sort of taking me out of the theme of the game, of this kind of, I mean, not that this is so much better, but at least it has a bit more character than this. But you're meant to be playing with these type of models. Or I was using one of my kids' dinosaurs, but they kept falling over. So I've stuck with these fellows for now because at least they stand up. In any event, this is a 2-player game, and the token here indicates where the character originally began. And in the first portion of the game, basically what you are doing is you are exploring, in quotes, the various tile possibilities. There are a number of different terrain types, and I'll pull up here to show you them as they are excuse me, laid out. There are lakes, these are ruins, basic snow, which seems to be what I got a lot of. There are mountains, there are forests. I actually haven't gotten any of those. And not sure what that is. I can't recall. And I think this is some type of village or city. The exploration, as it is, really is not anything beyond simple D12 roll. And based on that roll, excuse me, here we can see the back of the rule book references what everything is, and oh, that was a castle tile. Yeah, that was always a little confusing to me. It didn't look much like a castle. Based on your D12 roll, you then pull the tile, and the number at the center of each tile represents an energy amount that you are granted when you move into the tile, and we'll get to that in a moment, what that means. But you explore through the tiles, and when you come to certain tiles, now you're doing this independently. So for the first 10 turns of the game, you, player 1, are doing your thing. Player 2, you're doing your thing, sort of alternating, but you're not mixing or mingling with each other at any rate. You can potentially encounter some other villains that you would have to conduct some combat with, but not with each other yet. So you do this exploration, and in the course of that, you have the opportunity to develop certain characteristics. We're focusing here now on the left. I'm just going to pull in a little bit to show you. Here is an individual character card. Here's a closer look at the character card and the statistics that are tracked. At the top, we have the health track, and you begin with a full health of 10, and various things can happen during the course of the game that cause this to diminish, and this character right now is at a health of 6. You begin with no energy, and there are various ways to gain energy, one of which is the exploration mechanic. So I showed you, for example, this tile, every tile has a value here. Some tiles have a value of 0. I think the mountains don't give you any energy, which I guess makes thematic sense. If you've climbed all the way to the top of the mountain, why would you get more energy? But you get the energy value in the tile that you move into, and that can cause your energy totals to rise to a maximum of 10. You're also going to be expending this energy, so it's going to be sort of going up and down during the course of the turn, and I'll explain in a moment what you could potentially be spending the energy on. And then there's something called control, and control is gained, focus, I guess they call it. You are measured on this control track, and you can see here now on the right hand side of this card that gives you the turn sequence. We'll just look for a moment at the bottom. The third portion of the turn, which is called breathe, you get to choose an action, and in this potential case you can use and expend energy. It's kind of written a little backwards, I think, but in any case, you can expend 2 energy to increase your focus by 1 if you so choose. And the focus is used in various ways, and one of it is to play and purchase these mutation cards. The number here represents the amount of focus that you would need to expend to put this card into play, and these are choices that you get to make to enhance your character in certain ways. So, for example, I haven't played this one, but it was in my hand. If I chose to play it, which I didn't, every time an opponent would draw an artifact card, I would get to roll a d6, and then on a 6, the opponent would give me that artifact card to me. So I didn't actually play this because I thought, well, 1 in 6 chance, it costs 3 focus. I chose instead to play, I might as well just show you. I chose instead to play this, a characteristic of a humanoid, which allows me to re-roll something that is a failed stealth test. Well, what does that mean? I mentioned that certain cards or certain tiles, such as these that we're seeing right here, ruins, and there's the village tiles, these can potentially be inhabited. And when you enter one of those, you need to roll on or conduct a stealth test, which is to roll against your control value. And if you roll less than or equal to your control value, you pass it, and if you roll greater than it, then there are consequences. And some of these consequences, this actually has happened to this character, some of these consequences involve losing health and also losing the ability to do certain portions of your turn. So you're forced to make some choices as you go in terms of what you're going to be focusing on and how you're going to be converting the energy that you get into various things. You can also take 2 of your energy and convert that into wounds, or I should say removal of wounds. So for example, I haven't done this yet, but I might. I've got a health only of 6, but I could take some of the energy that I have, right now I am at full strength, and expend it to move my health back up. So that's one possibility that I could use my energy for. As we pull back here and look again, we can see that this is the first portion of the game that happens in daylight is 10 turns long. Each turn you get to do an exploration. So we see here we're at the end of this turn, and then basically what would happen is we would be rolling a d12. So if it's the blue guy's turn, we're rolling this d12. We rolled on an 8. Looking up here, and we see that that is a mountain tile. Unfortunately, we get no energy for that. We would be pulling the mountain tile and then just placing it. And again, this is a little, I've got them kind of scrunched together here, partially just to show you and get it on one, the video. But also it doesn't really matter at the beginning because they're totally independent. They will become joined shortly. So he moves into the the mountain area, and then he goes into the rest of his turn, which is, it would be to resolve close combat, but there is no close combat yet. So then the next part, he would get to earn the terrain energy. Well, there is no terrain energy from here. So he moves into the next part of the turn, which is where he gets to do one action to either activate a mutation. And we looked at some of the mutation cards for the purple fellow. I'll show you the blue fellow. He's already got this in his hand, radioactive. This would allow the current terrain tile energy always to be equal to 3. Now I say this is in his hand. He hasn't activated it yet. He would need a total of 6 control points to activate this. To me, this is a pretty good card because it's going to be generating the maximum energy for you each time, but he doesn't have enough control, so he can't actually do anything with that card. The other mutation card he has in his hand is something that requires also more than he has. This is Screamer. All opponents on castles or ruins tiles lose 1 hit point at the beginning of your turn. He can't do that either. He does have one currently active mutation, and I will show that to you. And that is that he is intelligent, and he gets to add 1 to his control at the beginning of each of his turn. Oh, actually, I should do that. So this brings his control up to 4 from 3, meaning he could actually use it to purchase this card. I don't think I'm going to do that, but I suppose he could. His control is 4, his current energy level is 5, and his current health is solid at 10. The only other thing then he can do in the decide phase is to quote-unquote hunt. The way you hunt is you roll a d6, and then whatever you roll, you get that in energy. So we'll roll our d6, and we rolled a 1. So he gets an additional energy, bringing his energy up to 6. The last phase of the turn is the breathe phase, and this is where he can decide to expend some of the energy that he has to either increase health, but his health is already at maximum, or he could give himself more focus, more control. And I think we're going to do that. We can, as per this card here, I think you can sort of sneak in and see it. We can take, for every 2 energy we expend, we can give ourselves 1 focus. We have our energy at 6, so if I bring it down to 4, I can increase my focus or control to 5, and I think I'll just leave it at that. And that is the end of this player's turn, this player's 10th turn. Then we move on to this player. Again, same scenario. You're basically just rolling this d12 to do the exploration. He rolled a 9. He got a lake tile, and the lake tile is going to give him 3 energy. That's pretty good. And we will place it here. He'll move into this here. We will bring up his, let me see if I can sort of slide over, actually show you the card. Now, you know what? He's actually at maximum energy now, so I don't actually think there's anything he can do with that. I think that's just what it is. Then he now probably should start, maybe he should activate a mutation. Let's see. He has this option here. He can aquatic, move directly between lake tiles within the same map, spending 2 energy. Well, he has no lake tiles, so that's not going to be useful. And he's got psychic. Every time an opponent draws an artifact card, roll on a d6. Oh, we showed this one already. All right, this is pretty good. We'll do that. That's going to cost us 3 control. 2, 3. We're down to 2. And so that's what we decided to do for our action here. We certainly didn't need to hunt because we're already at the maximum, and we couldn't search because we weren't on an artifact or villain card. So that was really all we could have done. And now we can potentially gain back some of the focus or control that we expended to put that card out, because we can expend 2 energy and gain 1. So we'll expend 2, we'll gain 1 more. I'm going to expend 2 more, come up to 5, and I'm actually going to do this again and come up to 7. Why? Honestly, I don't know why. I haven't really formulated a strategy about this game. To be honest with you, there's things about the rules I don't quite fully understand. The designer has posted a lot of videos that I have watched, but I still feel that there are so many gaps in my understanding of the game, at least, that I don't really have a strategy. But I feel that knowing that the stealth test has to do with it's easier to pass the more control you have. I just want my control to be a little higher. I'm just trying to keep these things more or less in line. I mean, that's the extent of the strategy that I have right now. So this then concludes the first portion of the game. I don't remember what this is called. I think it had a name. Let me just look and see. Awakening. The Awakening chapter represents, here, I'll just show you from the rule book. The Awakening chapter represents the period of time during which players gather their strength and start to explore the terrain that surrounds them. Starts on round 1 and lasts until the end of round 10. During the Awakening chapter, the active game cycle is daylight. So I actually don't have my turn marker here, but we are up to 10, and you can see here the indication for the daylight turns, and then you can see slightly at the top here that it starts to turn night. The overall game is 30 turns. What is meant to happen now is, I'll just read this to you here. Whoops, I knocked over the purple guy. End of round 10, cycle change. At the end of round 10, the player with the highest control level will join all players' maps anyway and anywhere he chooses, but keeping each map's original layout. This is an example of one issue I have with the rules. I mean, if you do something anyway and anywhere you choose, it's not keeping each map's original layout. So this is just confusing to me. There's an example here that I haven't been able to figure out. It says, say, that the person with the highest control level will do it, and that's going to be, I already forgot where this guy was standing. I'll have to go back and look in the video to replace him. In any case, excuse me, blue has the highest control, and what we're going to do is just flip over these tiles, I guess just preserving the layout here, because that seems to be what we're meant to do, and then we're just going to join them up here. And I'm not going to do this on camera, but I do want to pause a minute here to point out something about the game that, maybe I'm playing it wrong, maybe I'm misunderstanding something. We have chosen through this random roll, we have obtained the tiles. There were, as I said, 7 different terrain tiles, and some of them offered various possibilities for encounters. But the difficulty is that since we never rolled, for example, on, let's see, where am I finding this? Another thing with the rules, there should just be a listing of all the terrain tiles and what their various benefits are. There are not. For example, here, the possibility of ruins and castles, of doing something, I'm not showing you that here on camera, but the possibility of something happening on a ruin or a castle tile, well, if you don't get that tile, then you have no possibility of that happening. And indeed, this fellow got a bunch of ruin tiles, and then mountain and snow and lake. This one got lake and snow and mountain also, but no ruins, no castle, and no village. So there was no possibility for any of the game effects that would come from being on those tiles. And as far as I can tell now, for the rest of the turns of this, at least this portion of the game, up 10 more turns, maybe even to the end, I'd have to check, we're not drawing any new tiles. We can't explore at night. So we're kind of stuck with what we got, and what we got was just totally random. We weren't making any decisions as to that. It's just whatever happened. And that's where I think some randomness starts to feel frustrating, because, at least for me, I mean, I accept randomness in games, and randomness can be very accurate in a sense in modeling any type of behavior. But when it then starts to exert control over what the gameplay and further decision making is, it becomes, I think, a little frustrating, as I said, because if you never, if you keep rolling numbers that are just giving you a small percentage of the available terrain, well, I'm not really sure what to do with that as a player. In any event, we're going to come back and deal with the night portion of this game. We're now in the nighttime phase, and we've been in this phase for a couple of turns, and we're getting to a key point of the game that is really kind of cool, and I'm actually filming at night. Hopefully this is going to work out, and I want to show you what happens. During the course of the game, as you know, we've been having and picking up various mutations, and one thing that I did not mention was I think these are crystals. I don't know. I'll put up exactly what they call them. These different colors here on the cards. These match up to what the possibilities are for who you can become. So during the course of the game, you're trying to figure out who you are, and there are 4 choices of characters that you can become, but you don't actually get to choose them. You are mutating into them, and there's basically a recipe for who you will become. And I've pulled this one because this is who this this blue character here has turned out to discover that he is really this Malice the Red, and the reason why is because he has the mutations there, 2 red and 1 blue and no green, and these are associated with various abilities. I think the green is geomorphic, and let's see, I can't remember what the others are. I'll put that up on the screen so I don't waste time looking for it. When you discover who you are, what you do is you take this card and you place it on your player mat, and this now becomes your new sequence of play because the characters are then at this point differentiated. So Malthus the Red has certain various abilities, and for example, one of them is that certain artifacts provide a wound token worth 2, so to do more wounds. And during darkness and before comparing results of combat dice, roll +1 base combat dice for each unsuccessful opponent roll. So you are an aggressive character here, and you then have your own sequence of play in terms of what you get to do with moving and deciding and breathing. They're slightly different abilities and a slightly different sequence of play than the kind of generic one that you shared. So as the game goes on and you discover who you are, and we've yet to discover who we are on the purple side, we can't seem to manage to stand up there, we will differentiate and we will become someone else. Now, one thing that is not clear to me in the rules is whether these 4 characters all do have different recipes, as it were, for becoming, but can you both become the same character? I guess you cannot. That wouldn't make sense, really. The part of the instructions when you're playing is to bear in mind what these, in essence, recipes are when you're choosing what mutations you pick, so that you sort of are planning toward getting somewhere. But if you're playing in a 2-player game, you both could be planning to get to the same thing. In any case, this is an interesting mechanic of the game. It's unique, and I like the idea of transformation and then what happens. And this is partially why I was demonstrating this 2-player game, to show that you have these 2 generic characters who start out with, in effect, the same sequence of play, the same benefits, and then as they travel through, as they ascend, as they transform, they differentiate into different characters with different abilities and skills and motivations. And I think that's to me something quite unique about this game, and it's very successfully done. The last thing I want to talk about in great detail is the hand-to-hand combat, which is pretty cool as to how it works out. It's a little complicated, so I'm just going to give an overview. It occurs when you are on the same hex. I'm going to call it a hex, but tile really. And you base the success roll on this terrain effect number here. So, for example, this purple guy came from 2. We're both on a 1 here. So the 2 becomes the number that you need to roll better than. And this guy came from the 1. So the 1 is the number, at least I think this is the way it is, that this guy needs to roll better than to defend. And you are accumulating a number of dice to roll based on a couple of things. There is a there's a chart here in the rule book, the base combat dice. Now remember, we are characters with certain mutations. So for our character here, we are a character with 2 body mutations and 1 soul mutation. Each body mutation gives him 3 dice, and each soul gives him 1. So that's 6, 7, 8. And he's also got a companion with him. We didn't touch on companions in the walkthrough, but you can pick up companions, and we had 1 here, so we pick up 1. So we are then rolling 9 dice for our combat. Let me just see, do we have, right, we are just rolling 9 here. And again, with our 9 dice, what we need to do is anything that is above a 2 or more is going to be a hit. And conversely, the defender is going to be rolling defense dice. Again, the amount of dice is going to be based on factors of his cards and his mutations and his special abilities, rolling those to determine whether he can deflect any of the hits or not. It's a little bit complicated, and it's pretty well explained. I'd say this portion of the rule book, which, I mentioned the rule book earlier as being a little confusing. They do spend a whole page on explaining close combat, and I think it does a pretty decent explanation of that. What did I think of this game? I really went through the ringer with this one because I started out so excited about it and really thinking I was going to love it. And when I started playing the first part, it fell a little flat for me with the randomness and the fact that I felt that I was not being able to gain full access to all of the cool things in the game. So, for example, here are some artifact cards. We never really showed any of these. These are things that you can pick up, and they're just really cool, like Lizard Blood. Receive 2 energy for each of your active mutation cards. That's pretty cool. A King Bracelet. You can trade this card for a companion card in Castle and Ruins tiles. Well, how cool is that? But, if you don't have Castle and Ruins tiles, you can't do that. And that becomes frustrating, and I think I let that get to me a little bit. Here's a crystal orb that I never got. You can choose one opponent's companion, and it cannot fight until the beginning of your next turn. That's pretty neat. There's, let's see, a Snow Cloak. You get to draw a companion card and use it until the beginning of your next turn and then return it. Cool. These things make sense, and they're pretty neat. The mutations themselves and the management of the mutations is another excellent mechanic, because you want to have certain benefits, but at the same time, you're needing to focus on the different types of mutations so that you can sort of figure out who you turn into. But at the same time, I felt, well, there's a lot of cool stuff here that I may need to discard and not be able to use to full effect. The villains, we never touched on this in the video either. There are certain villains that come into play, and there are giant bears, and there are some woolly mammoths, the kinds of things that you might expect. Can't seem to get that. There we go. Add +1 to this villain's combat dice score for each of your active body mutations, so they kind of respond to you. That part of the game is neat also. It feels somewhat responsive, but that's, again, it's sort of paired up with this frustrating sense. I wish there was just a different way of revealing the tiles, because when you're playing a tile laying game, I feel you want to have some decision. So even if each tile that you picked up, say, was bigger, and then you had a choice of where to go, sort of a la Mage Knight or something like that, you feel as if you have a little more agency, as opposed to, in theory, you could continue to roll simple 1 to 3s and just be getting these snow tiles the whole time. So what's the point of having the 7 terrain tiles? So that, for me, was where the game sort of fell the most flat. Where it came alive, I think, was once the transformation happened, once the players had different abilities and had in the darkness, I didn't mention this, but in the darkness you're allowed to move extra tiles. So you're in a small board, you're moving around more, there's more interaction. The combat takes into consideration all of the various benefits that you have from your mutations and your companions that you've picked up along the way. Here's a couple of, these are the companion cards. So here's a hunter companion that you could get to give you some additional combat dice. You could have a bodyguard, for example, who would absorb some damage to you. There's some cool things here that you can have in the later portions of the game that I really enjoyed. What I haven't mentioned, and let me find the rules, is this solo rule set that ultimately I didn't demonstrate here, which of course this is why I was interested in it for the channel. I initially, so here's the back of the rule book for the second edition at any rate, with a single player rules. Most of them are the same, but they're sort of dispatching, you basically play against villains who are your opponents, and they sort of come after you, as it were. The reason that I didn't do this, and honestly, maybe it would have been better, because they're telling you you're rolling a d6 and then that is what is controlling their activity, and it is a preset map with the solo game, and that actually ironically is why I didn't want to play it. But I realize now, because it's preset, you're starting with, let's see, where is it, somewhere here. You're starting with 3 snow, 3 forest, so it is more dispersed. You're getting a lake, a ruins, a castle, and a village, and a mountains, and a forest. So that could at least be a little bit better, because you will have some variability in the terrain and the effects that go with it. Whereas in the 2-player game that I was playing, I just didn't get that, and that's what really sort of bothered me. So now that I look back on it, I think maybe this would have been a better opportunity. And then it's a simple AI mechanic where you're rolling a d6 to indicate what the villain is going to do at any point. So, looking a little more closely at these single player rules, I have a feeling that I might have been a little bit happier had I gone with that than what I ultimately did do, which was to try to demonstrate and play just both sides, because that terrain pulling and the total randomness or luck based on the D12 for that was bothersome to me. But overall, my final feeling, and maybe this is just something I should go back and do and play using the single player rules. My final feeling about it was that once you got to the transcendent part, the mutation part, the differentiation part of players in the middle and end part of the game, it really did come alive. The combat sequences were easy to resolve with the dice, but the way in which you determined how many dice you got to roll was dependent upon choices that you made earlier in terms of skills, mutations, companions, and those types of decisions that are strategy decisions, and that's really what you want to impact the game. So there you have it. This is Ascended, and it is available from playascended.com. Thanks for watching.